how's it going, captains? Admiral Tori here, and welcome aboard for another World of Warships video on my channel. In today's video, I am going to take a look at the long-awaited arrival of the Tier 8 Premium Royal Navy battleship, HMS Vanguard, the last battleship to be launched in the world and the largest built by the Royal Navy. Right away, I love this ship to death. She is a very fun ship to play, but of course, you guys got questions about her, and the bigger question is that does she fit your particular taste? Because I think that the Vanguard does have a certain threshold before it becomes acceptable to certain players out there. For some, she is unacceptable because there are flaws that are just too fatal for them. So don't worry, I will try to answer as many questions as possible and as thoroughly as possible before you spend your money on this Tier 8 Premium. Because Tier 8 Premiums make a lot of credits, makes a lot of XP that you can convert, and of course, train captains. But they are also expensive, and the Vanguard is no exception. So, if you don't know what the Vanguard is, the reason why she's famous is because she was the largest from the Royal Navy, and she was the last battleship. That is her historical significance. I believe she also helped travel or escorted the royal family from England to South Africa, if I recall correctly. I did some little reading. I'm not a total expert on the Vanguard, but I pulled some details that were interesting and I want to point them out. Now, the best way to describe the Vanguard is that the Vanguard is it's a scrap ship, as people would describe her, but it doesn't mean that she was a bad ship at the time. She was actually very powerful. It's just that she was too late to enter the war, and her construction is where it gets interesting with the Vanguard, at least to me. I'm going to point out those details and compare them to how the Vanguard is designed in game. So first things first is the hull. The Vanguard hull is actually a Lion class battleship. Now the Lion class were in construction in 1940 after World War II was started, when Germany invaded France and then Britain declared war on Germany and things went down that way. So Britain needed to build some battleships, and the London and Washington Treaty really limited their abilities to compete against the German Scharnhorst class battleships and of course the Bismarck. The British weren't able to build any battleship above the 35,000 tonnage. So the King George V, the Nelson, they peaked their limits, while the Germans have the Bismarck, which is way above the limits. So in 1940, they tried to build, I think, 3 Lion class battleships. Now, if you don't know what the Lion looks like, it just so happens that it's also in the main line. This is what the Lion looks like. I think it tells me how many they were supposed to be. Nope, they didn't put that down. But in the dry docks or the shipyard, the Royal Navy was constructing the hull of the Lion. Now, Britain being Britain, it is an island nation, although she has the largest empire known to humanity, bigger than the Roman Empire. Quote me if I'm wrong, but she's still an island nation, and she's next to Germany and all other parts of the world. As far as I know, they conquer for economic reasons. So their resources had to come into an island nation, which the Germans did very well with blockading and ruining the shipping line. So resources was scarce, which means that these Lion class battleships that are larger than your typical Royal Navy battleship, because remember they were limited by the treaty, weren't that big of a priority, and eventually the British gave up on it because most of the material should be going to the planes, the rifles, tanks to fight the Germans, or at least defend the homeland, because they were on the defensive before later parts of the war when the Russians start pushing the Eastern Front and the Americans join the war on D-Day. They can start mechanizing towards Berlin. So the Vanguard, the best way to describe the Vanguard is like a buffering YouTube video. It's building and then it buffers, it stops. It's building and then it stops. Resume, go, resume, go. This is where it's interesting about Vanguard, historically speaking, because although her hull is supposed to be the Lion class battleship, it isn't exactly like the Lion class. There are two particular instances that I can think of that were incorporated into the design, because as they were updating the Vanguard, changes were made from wartime experience. One of them is the attack on the Prince of Wales and I think HMS Repulse. Now, Repulse is a battle cruiser, and the Prince of Wales is a King George V class battleship, which I do happen to have for those people who don't know what the King George looked like. Now, the King George V has the same hull as the Lion, or at least the Lion took the inspiration from the King George and tried to improve on it. They learned that during the attack, when the Japanese carrier, I think Akagi or Kaga, attacked the Prince of Wales and sunk the Prince of Wales by torpedo, if I recall correctly, they learned that they needed to improve the King George V hull with better underwater torpedo protection, which was incorporated on the Vanguard. Now, I'm not sure how great the torpedo protection is on the Vanguard. It's really isn't that great compared to her tier 8 competitors in the game, but historically speaking, it's supposed to be an improvement. And let's check the King George. Yeah, a 3% improvement. Yeah, you can say whatever you want about that, but that's just an interesting fact that I was reading on. Now, another thing was noted is that the bow. Now, one of the requirements on the Royal Navy design of battleships before the Vanguard was that the Royal Navy guns need to be able to elevate at 0 degrees and fire. For example, look at the Nelson. This bow deck is flat. Look at the hood. It's flat. Look at the King George. It's flat. You get my point. You are able to fire 0 degrees elevated with the frontal turrets bow on. Now with the Vanguard is actually sloped, and the reason why it's sloped is because the Royal Navy battleships had trouble when it comes to the Arctic waves or the Norwegian region. Whenever there's a heavy storm, the bow tends to take the full force of the wave, and as a result, water tends to get on the decks too much, to a point where it might leak into the turrets and might ruin equipment. That was a major issue, and this is why you see these little shields on battleships, is because they're supposed to deflect the water out of the way from getting into the deck and seep into the ships under the below deck, right? This was a major problem with the Germans. The Germans originally used to have like a straight looking bow, and you can find that on the Admiral Hipper class cruisers like these. These are like the early German bows, especially on the earlier battleships. This was an inefficient design, and this was notable on the Scharnhorst class battleship, because the Scharnhorst used to have that particular bow. But they changed the bow. The Germans changed the bow into a more notable, what is known as the Atlantic bow, to reduce the waves getting into the decks. And the reason why is because the water actually seeped into the first turret and kind of flooded the room, which was an issue. So the British were no different, and they had problems. So in order to fix this issue, I'm not sure how efficient or better the bow is compared to the previous design, is that they actually sloped the bow right here, the bow's deck, so the water wouldn't be able to seep onto the decks or get into the turrets as what the Germans were facing, the problems that they were having. So that is one notable difference from the old designs of the Royal Navy's battleships. Another note is that in order for the Vanguard to achieve its speed of 30 knots, there were several measures taken. One of them was that a reduction to the belt thickness. The belt thickness on the Vanguard is 356 millimeters compared to the King George, which is the inspiration for the Lion class hull, 381. The King George has a thicker belt compared to the Vanguard. I believe that it was more of an emphasis on trying to get the ship to speed, especially when you compare it to the Bismarck. One interesting tidbit that I was reading is that you might ask, why does these higher tier Royal Navy battleship have a flat stern? As crazy as it seems, if you want to intrigue your fellow shipmates about why Royal Navy battleship have this flat stern that you find on the Lion and the Conqueror, is that this flat stern technically is called a transom, which is a very fancy word for flat stern. This allowed the Royal Navy battleship to gain an extra speed of 0.33 knots. Now, is that useful? Yeah, I guess in real life, because you're gaining something, but it's not as big as a big deal compared to gaining 3 knots or 4 knots for that particular point. But in terms of warships interest, this is going to be an issue. I don't mind losing 0.33 knots because this is flat, which means that if a battleship gets on your stern, they're going to be able to get full penetration. If not, it can be possible, although this is quite a lengthy portion of the ship, they can actually hit the citadel of your ship from the rear turrets, which is turret D, right over here. So if they get lucky of penetrating your stern, if close enough, they can hit the citadel aft warship or the citadel. Well, this is also part of the aft warship, but you get the point. That is going to be an issue. I have not get into a situation where guns actually were able to citadel me at the stern because this is flat, but I'm just letting you know that that is going to be an issue to the player's convenience. Another big thing that I want to talk about, or at least that's the biggest thing, is that the citadel is positioned above the waterline. Now, during her testing phase, her citadel was way above the waterline, where the actual the torpedo built, I believe. Right over, if only I can get the camera to focus here, right here, where the armor belt right here. So that was a massive issue with the Vanguard, but if you're wondering, is the final product different? Yes, it has been changed to a more reasonable citadel, but you still can be easily citadel. Not as bad as the Roma, which is the worst citadel at the Tier A competition. She is easily deleted if you show broadside in the high tier matchmaking, especially when you're under 8 kilometers or 6 kilometers against like a Montana or Iowa or a Kerfers, because there have been times where I've been deleted from 100% or 80% to 0. Vanguard wise, she can be deleted unless you get lucky. Now, what does that mean? Well, you don't want to bring the Vanguard into a brawling situation. You want to maintain medium to long range engagement, but even long range engagement is going to be an issue because that is where I want to talk about the guns. So just letting you know, if you hate high citadels, don't buy the Vanguard, because Vanguard has this atrocious citadel. Well, a reasonable citadel, but it's atrocious when you talk about the competition, because most of the other battleships have their citadels at the waterline. So let's talk about the guns, because that is a interesting point that people were being interested in, or at least talking about, is that these guns, like I said, the Lion class battleships weren't able to be constructed because of the lack of material, which means that the Royal Navy didn't have any 406mm guns that were intended for the Lion. And since the Vanguard was originally a Lion class battleship, the Royal Navy needed to figure out a way to place guns on a ship that they don't have available. And it just so happens that after the London and Washington Treaty in the 20s, 2 of their battle cruiser, HMS Glorious and HMS Courageous, I believe, were converted into carriers, and they had their World War I 381mm guns laying around. And you can guess what I'm about to say. They used those World War I guns on the Vanguard because of the shortage of material. So these guns are, obsolete. They are 381mm and they're 42 caliber, right? So this is probably Vanguard's biggest weakness, but at the same time, this is Vanguard's biggest advantage in terms of the fun factor. And the reason I say that is because these guns rotate pretty fast, they reload pretty fast. Well, it's 1 second faster than the Bismarck, I believe. I think the Bismarck is 26 seconds, and ultimately, they're very accurate. The Vanguard is the most accurate battleship to play at Tier 8 with a Sigma, I believe, of 2.0 and a dispersion of, I think, better slightly better than the Japanese. I might be wrong, but the point is that these guns are extremely accurate at the cost of having obsolete gun turrets, because these turrets are thinly armored. They tend to be knocked out compared to all the other tier 8 battleships. And of course, the most notable problem is that these turrets are squished together so tight to a point that you have absolutely awful turret angles, which means that having a citadel above the waterline and awful turret angles that force you to show broadside to fire a full broadside salvo will cause problem for several players out there. So if you don't like showing broadside, if you don't like being citadel, if you don't like moving around that much, the Vanguard is probably not for you. Luckily, to offset this fatal error or this fatal flaw with this design is that the maneuverability is superb in terms of the rudder shift time. Now, the turn circle is pretty much typical at tier 8, but the rudder shift time is cruiser level. To give a perspective, I got this thing down to 7.8 seconds. The ratio is 12.3 seconds. The Roma is 12.5. Yeah, you get the point. The Vanguard has really good rudder shift. This is cruiser level rudder shift, which means that the Vanguard is always on the move, showing broadside, firing the salvos, timing the salvos from the enemy ships that are firing at you. Make sure you angle, and you should be fine with the Vanguard. Even though the Vanguard is classified as a fast battleship, I feel like she's more like a battle cruiser in this game, or the ideal high tier battle cruiser, because of this this constant movement, the citadel being above the waterline, and having small guns at her tier. Now, these guns, the shells on the guns, well, at least the shell velocity is faster than your typical Royal Navy shells, especially when you compare to like the Warspite. And part of that reason is because the Vanguard received the supercharged powder bags, I believe, which allows them to fling a shell even farther, increasing the range. And I believe the turrets were modified to elevate the guns even more. You can kind of see that little bulge of above the turret guns here, the guns above the guns. But yes, these shells are pretty fast. They kind of overpen at times too often against cruisers, but ultimately these shells aren't the same as the main line from the Royal Navy, because the main line from the Royal Navy is all about high fire chance, great penetration, which is the quarter penetration for the HE, but below average AP performance, because their APs tend to be short fuse, and as a result, when you don't penetrate deep enough, you get 0 damage, which results in the icon showing shatter, which not necessarily means that the shell shatter, it's just that it prematurely detonates before it even hits anything important, which means that you have to use the AP shells at close to medium range with the Royal Navy battleship. In the case of the Vanguard is the Royal Navy battleships that I wanted from the main line. She really is the tier 8 version of the Warspite. This is the perfect Royal Navy battleship that should have been from the main line, but for whatever reason, Wargaming went with the other route, throwing the Corks as having the best HE and mediocre AP. Vanguard case is that she still has the quarter pen on the HE, I believe. She got a nerf on the HE chance, the fire chance with her HE, from the 40% on average. Usually Royal Navies at the higher tiers have like a 45, 46, 47% chance of setting something on fire to a 34.0% chance. But in return, the AP shells are buffed to be more normal, alongside with the higher velocity due to the supercharged powder bags. So now you don't have the fuse time from the main line, and you have a more normal battleship fuse time. Basically, she has a normal battleship AP shell that I always wanted on the Royal Navy battleship, other than the Warspite, because the Warspite is a perfect example, and I find it funny how the Warspite came out a year and a half or maybe 2 years before the actual main line, which supposedly foreshadowed the characteristic of the Royal Navy, having decent AP, above average HE, but great accuracy. And that is not seen from the main Royal Navy line. Only the Warspite and the Vanguard now are the most accurate Royal Navy battleship. So, although you have World War I obsolete guns, you have these nice fire rate, the nice normal AP, and great HE still. With just the awful firing angle, for secondaries, really, you don't have that much secondaries. You only got, 4 turrets on each side, so there's 8 guns on each side. I don't depend on secondaries. Many of your guns are going to be doing the most of the heavy lifting. The Vanguard has superb AA. I haven't encountered that many carriers yet, but from what I heard, she has very powerful AA. One notable AA that I want to talk about is the 40mm Beaufort Mark 6. This is a new design that I have not seen, because typically you find these Beauforts with the quad guns that you find on like the American battleships or the Richelieu, which was upgraded when she went to New York. But yeah, this is your typical Beauforts. The Beauforts on the Vanguards are even better, slightly, or actually much better, because I think those guys do like 250 DPS, while this almost does 300. So at 3.5 kilometers, you're going to be shredding planes as long as these guns don't get knocked out. Concealment, if you have Concealment Expert, you will get it down to 12 kilometers. I strongly recommend you, when it comes to the captain skills, grab not only Concealment Expert, but grab Fire Prevention, because this ship tends to burn. You want to grab Superintendent, because this is a Royal Navy battleship, since the deck and the superstructure, well, let's talk about the deck. The deck is 32mm, which is enough to bounce the 406mm guns, but you're going to take a lot of HE damage from the 150s, who has IFHE, and the 203mm guns from the heavy cruisers, which are very common. And of course, don't get me started with the Royal Navy superstructure. This is a massive superstructure. It's beautiful, but it's not practical in terms of warships, because you're going to be taking a lot of damage from it. Overall, I think I hit most of the points about the Vanguard. I also wanted to point out that when it comes to getting the captain skills, I definitely want you guys to grab Adrenaline Rush, because this ship is fun when it comes to firing guns. It's all about the guns in the ship, movement and firing your guns on the Vanguard. Aside from that, let's move on and let's showcase the gameplay. So, I have a game with the Vanguard. I am playing on the map called Hotspot, and it's a standard battle. I am also top tier in this game, and the fact that I am top tier means that I'm going to use AP most of the time. I want to take the liberty and talk about how to use Vanguard's guns, because as stated before, the weakest point on the Vanguard are her guns, because they're considered obsolete at her tier when it comes to the competition. I mean, yes, the Alsace has 380mm guns, but she got 12 of them. The Bismarck has the same number of guns, but they're 45 caliber, and she got secondaries to offset that flaw. The Richelieu got the same caliber guns, or at least the same class of guns compared to the Vanguard, even though I think the Vanguard is 1mm bigger, but she got all of her guns facing forward, so majority of the time she's going to pull off full broadside salvos. The Vanguard, the only advantage that the Vanguard has over the competitors is her accuracy. And of course, she has a little HE advantage, because she does have the Royal Navy HE, just a nerfed fire chance. So when to use HE, when to use AP, and what are the guns are like. Because the irony is, they are the weakest point of the ship, but yet the strongest reason why I love the Vanguard. I just can't stop playing the Vanguard for this reason. It's a completely different feel. There are several ways to gain the satisfaction of playing battleships. One of them is having big guns, like the North Carolina 406mm guns. You get 2 to 3 penetration, and they do massive amount of damage. Another satisfaction of playing battleship might be the Scharnhorst, a constant barrage of 280mm guns. But the Vanguard, only like 2 to 5 ships that I play has this type of accuracy. Accuracy is key on the Vanguard. You might not have the biggest guns, but you definitely have the most accurate guns. Yes, I might get salvos where I get 4 to 5 hits and decent damage. It should be massive amount of damage if it were on the North Carolina, but Remember, when you're playing those ships with bigger guns, it's always nice to have bigger guns, but nothing's more frustrating than to not hit anything. But the Vanguard, it's extremely satisfying. And part of that reason is because I'm just not used to seeing accurate guns this often. So that is something unique about the Vanguard. So here are the rules when it comes to using Vanguard's gun. If you're top tier, use AP. The only reason you ever use HE is that the tier 8 battleships bow out, because 27mm of armor and above, you can't penetrate or overmatch. It's just a fact about 381mm guns. But tier 7 battleships have 25mm of armor all around. Cruisers tend to be very thin. The only cruiser I can think of that has 27mm of armor is a tier 8 American heavy cruiser, I believe, the Prince Eugen. There's not many ships that can balance your 381mm guns. As a matter of fact, these guns are considered very powerful at her tier. If you're playing a tier 10 game, and since she is a tier 8 ship nowadays, you're going to be spending 60 to 70% of the time playing against tier 10. If you want to be consistent, just use HE. But the only time you ever use AP is on a broadside cruiser, and if the battleship is broadside and is less than 15 kilometers away from you. Now, you can fire AP beyond 15 kilometers against a battleship. It's just that the damage isn't impressive. I think you're better off trying to get a chance of setting a fire on a battleship and just irritate whoever battleship that you're trying to hit. Because remember, tier 10, tier 9 battleships are massive, which means that they're easier to hit when it comes to using HE, which is where the fire chance comes into play with the Vanguard. So HE is exclusively used in the higher tiers and against destroyers, while AP is only used when you're top tier and you're up against cruisers or battleships who wish to show broadside at any tier. I mean, look at that. That thing is seriously accurate. I mean, I don't know what to say. The Vanguard is the most modern Royal Navy battleship. She's fitted with so many types of technology. I mean, if you go on Google, search up Vanguard and look at her fire control system. She got radar for warning when there's enemy planes coming at you, even though that is not a feature in World of Warships. She got radar to detect where the shells splash, so the next salvo should be more accurate. And that really does fit the playstyle of the Vanguard in World of Warships. It's all about accuracy. She even has American radar for her secondaries. Her secondaries fire control system, if you take a look at the Vanguard's details near her secondaries, you will recognize one of the little fire control modules are similar to the Iowa class or the North Carolina class battleships. She has every sort of technology to give her the advantage of being very accurate. And you will witness me pull off some ridiculously consistent salvos against the enemy Nagato. So I am pushing up, and the enemy Bismarck is up ahead. Now, I want to stay comfortably at 10 kilometers and above. Below 10 kilometers, as stated before, she has a citadel. It's not ideal to brawl with a citadel this big. I mean, North Carolina can get away with it. Bismarck definitely a ship that can get away with citadels at close range because that's a German thing. Vanguard, you don't want to do that. So, enemy Nagato is aiming at me. I'm not showing that much of a broadside, but it's quite a broadside. You notice how bad the firing angles are, but the accuracy is what makes it worth. So right here, one salvo at the Nagato and a massive amount of damage on that Nagato, 13k, and look how accurate that was. That was more than 50% of my shells hit the target. Here goes another salvo. Like I said, since the battleship is showing broadside, switch to AP, but then again, I am top tier, which means I'm going to be using AP all the time. Got some nice hits, but also the Nagato hit my citadel, which gives you an idea that this angle is unacceptable to taking big 410mm shells from Nagato. But then again, I do have the Royal Navy repair party. I forgot to note that the Vanguard does have a massive health pool for her tier, and her repair party is slightly better, if not way better than the Monarch, but as stated before, she's very squishy against HE, and she does take a lot of damage, so it kind of, balance out. It's not really a massive advantage, it just looks impressive. So here, we go for another salvo, and look at that! I mean, how often do you see salvos like these? These come like every 20 salvos that you fire in a typical battleship to see such accuracy, such dispersion. This is where the fun factor for the Vanguard comes into play. It's just all about maneuvering, getting to different position, and firing on accurate salvos. And yes, sometimes they are inaccurate. There's got to be times where it's inaccurate. But I mean, look at this. They're all perfectly grouped together, very tight. And the Nagato is fairly angled. We got 5 hits. 5 hits at almost maximum range with the Vanguard. Not many ships can pull this off. I don't even recall a time when I pulled something this accurate with something like the Yamato. Here we go again, another salvo. I mean, look at that, the right 2 shells are almost about to combine into 1 shell, and we're going to hit 4 hits, 4 penetration, 1 overpen, so a total of 5. 5 out of the 8 guns hit the target at max range. Yeah, that to me, that's satisfying. I mean, yeah, it's not that big of damage because these guns aren't big enough to penetrate targets that far, but it's just satisfying to see something that you don't usually see often on a battleship. The only battleship I can think of the top of my head that can do something like this is the Yamato, of course, and the Warspite. Maybe the Montana, but then again, Montana has a lot of guns, and they sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not that accurate, but they're consistent because it's American, right? They get that access to the dispersion module, or the dispersion upgrade, if I put it that way. So enemy Bismarck is shown broadside. Perfect time to use AP, which I already have loaded. If I was in North Carolina, it would be really nice to be in North Carolina because at this range you can't really miss and you got big guns. But of course, the closer you are, the more accurate you will be, and since the Vanguard is already accurate, you can only imagine how great the hit rate with the Vanguard at this range. But then again, horrible turret angles and that citadel that's above the waterline. There is that trade-off, and if you're facing targets who aren't that bright, then all you have to do is just wait for them to fire first, then you fire. Never ever fire broadside when they got a broadside on you. Now, if the enemy you're facing is smart enough, as in the instance of me, who knows how the Vanguard operates, I would personally would have held my fire, or maybe just use the first turret and wait until the Vanguard shows broadside. But yeah, I mean, normally you don't just fire 2 turrets with, a total of 4 guns on this type of configuration, but I feel so confident at times where four guns is just enough to do some damage because how accurate they are. It's just so tight. But of course, if the target is using camouflage, you will notice there is a massive difference in dispersion. So we just scored some hits on that New Orleans. Not that impressive because it's at a distance, so even though it's a penetration, it's not that much damage. But hey, it's a hit. So now I'm trying to rush back to our flag because the enemy has completely pushed the east side and taking our flag. Now the Vanguard is a fast battleship, which means that you can get from place to place, and that should be the way for a tier 8 battleship. You are expected to be at least 27 knots, because below that it's going to be a problem at the higher tiers when things are moving that quick. So I'm trying to fire at the Atlanta. Normally I would use HE against light cruisers like the Atlanta because AP tends to overpenetrate, but in this case, I mean, this thing is so accurate that I'm just going to use AP because, I mean, look at that. How can you possibly argue this? And goodbye, Atlanta. And I don't think she was camouflaged, which means that my dispersion is even tighter than usual. So there goes the Atlanta. We're going to start pushing full steam ahead toward our flag. I'm trying to target ships that are on the flag to reset the capture point, because what's the point of playing the game if the game ends already because the enemy has captured a flag? trying to shoot at the Atlanta because the Atlanta seems to be the one who's holding majority of the capture progress on the flag. Enemy Dallas, I think that's a Dallas. She's showing broadside. I don't even care because I assume that the ships near me will be able to deal with her, and that will be the case. Firing at the guys now. My God, the ship is so accurate that I miss. Like, look how tight that was. So I'm trying to shoot at the guys now because that is the only target that is available to shoot at. They are really close to capturing our flag, but one of our ships, I think is the Hu Hang or Hu Hong, I don't know how to pronounce the name of that ship because it's in Chinese. She was fortunate enough to actually set a fire on the Ganais now, or at least hit the Ganais now to reset the capture progression, but that is not enough because the enemy Atlanta is capturing majority of the flag. So I'm just trying to hit the Ganais now for now, but we really want to hit the Atlanta to fully reset the flag. And right there, the Atlanta is spotted. It's one of these moments where it doesn't matter how big your gun is. You gotta hit the target in order to save the flag. And I think the Vanguard can do that very well. This you will realize how important it is to have this particular accuracy. So fire an arrow salvo here is gonna go towards the Atlanta. And we do get 2 hits on the Atlanta and almost fully reset the progression on that flag. Now I am aware of the enemy North Carolina that is on my port side, and I want to be aware of it, but at the same time, I can show broadside since I have great concealment. So you have to pick your position correctly, because if you don't, if that North Carolina is smart enough, he knows that the Vanguard has a waterline, or at least above a waterline citadel, he's going to take every single opportunity to get rid of more than half HP Vanguard to get that nice score. But fortunately, I was looking at the North Carolina with my binoculars to make sure that he's not focusing me. Now I'm going to shift my focus back on the flag because that is the main concern of the game right now. The good guys now fire at me. Since my armor is thick enough, they're just going to bounce. I'm going to shoot at the Atlanta because the Atlanta is a target that can go concealed, and at the same time she is holding majority of the progression. And she angled just enough where all of my shells hit the Atlanta, at the same time also citadel her and deleting her out the game. This ship does very well. I must admit, it does very well dealing with cruisers that don't have 27mm of armor and above. Because like I said, 27mm is enough to bounce my 381mm shells. The good guys now showing some broadside, got 4 hits. I mean, the consistency, it just continues. I don't know what to say. This ship is fun because of how consistent it is. So I'm going to show broadside against the Ganais now, and I'm not afraid to do that because the Ganais now has only 6 guns, and they're not that accurate compared to my guns. Fire another salvo. Now North Carolina is focusing me. I believe this... Oh no, did not take out the Ganais now, but I promise you the next salvo will. Normally I think I should switch to HE to guarantee the hit on the Ganais now, because if she angles enough, she might bounce my shells, but it doesn't even matter because she's going to show broadside, and I know, feeling very confident. I mean, there is no other ship but the Vanguard and a few others that I listed earlier that have this much confidence of hitting a target. Ooh, oh my god, almost got hit at the citadel from there. It splashed right on the water, fell short. So here comes the North Carolina, and she's going to show broadside. I'm trying to hold my angle because I don't want to get citadel. Just the rear turrets is enough to handle the North Carolina. So she's gonna fire her salvo. I'm gonna wait until she fires all of her guns, and then I'm going to show broadside. With that timing, I'm going to fire all of my guns. At the same time, the North Carolina is showing broadside, which means that with this great of accuracy, although they're 381mm guns, they're going to score some massive hits. 5 shells out of 8 hit their target. Yeah, right here, I'm just impressed. This game really did impress me of how the Vanguards perform as being a top tier ship. It's a different story when you're bottom tier, but like I said, you can work with it. Here we go again, and Citadel. I can aim very low at the waterline, and the reasons why is because of how flat the shell arc, since she does have pretty high shell velocity. Enemy North Carolina almost hit the Citadel, but she hit the upper part of my ship, which means that is 32 millimeters, and they're just going to overpen. Here we go, another salvo. Hit the bow of the ship. Fortunately, I was able to hit something that's thick enough to take some sort of penetration, and just with the second turret, feeling very confident that I should be able to secure the kill. It doesn't require a full broadside salvo to take out that target because of how accurate the guns are. So moving forward, she really does feel like a battle cruiser, even though she is a fast battleship, but I feel like this would have been what people wanted from the hood. But yeah, you can get an idea. Now, remember the Nagato? I think I should have finished the Nagato at that moment when I was slugging with the Nagato earlier. I was still keen on trying to take out the Nagato, but since the Bismarck was so close to me and she's showing broadside, I decided to shoot the Bismarck. I think the game would have been different if I at least attempted to just continue to shoot at the Nagato, even though she's like 19 kilometers away from me. But yeah, she is one of the last surviving ship. Now, it looks like it's going to be game over for sure. But, I mean, the enemy, the New Orleans, just look at the New Orleans where she last spotted. Now she appeared. Yeah, she's somewhat thrown yet. So, I'm fine with that because then I will be able to get my Kraken. Going to fire at the New Orleans. Now, this dispersion is bad now because the New Orleans has the camouflage, which increased the dispersion on my ship, but it could be worse because if I have a ship that's less accurate than the Vanguard, it would definitely wouldn't hit the New Orleans. So here we go, another salvo. Let's see if it hits the New Orleans. No. The rear guns will. Yes, it will, because the New Orleans is turned slightly for me to Citadel, and there's my Kraken. Yeah, although I do lose the game, but I have every moment of this game, I just had a blast with the Vanguard. Aside from that, if you got any questions, leave them down in the comment section below and I will try to get to them as soon as possible. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time on World of Warships.